apologize, everyone, the technical difficulties. Again, my name's Peggy Apthorpe, and I'm currently working as an AmeriCorps with Conservation Nebraska. And Conservation Nebraska is a nonprofit statewide organization dedicated to keeping our natural resources healthy. One of the main ways we do that is through programs like the one that we are doing this evening on exploring waterfowl, hunter expectations, satisfaction, and regulations. And we're very appreciative of people like Mark Vrtiska, who are willing to give of their time and energy to help us with our public education efforts. I'm a little confused because we had the technical difficulties. Mark is a, excuse me, I know that you are with the University of Nebraska Wildlife Conservation, or the School of Natural Resources. And again, we're very thankful to the School of Natural Resources and Mark for helping us out. Mark has worked with, before he worked with the School of Natural Resources, he was with Nebraska Game and Parks. He also was a regional biologist for Ducks Unlimited, and he's originally from Vrtiska, Nebraska. And I'm sure that he knows a lot about the topic tonight: waterfowl, hunter expectations, satisfaction, and regulations. We will be recording the program, so in case you know people who are unable to attend, it will be up on the Conservation Nebraska YouTube channel in a couple of weeks. And if you would like to put your questions in the chat box, that would be helpful. We'll address them at the end of the program. So with that, Mark, thank you for being so patient, and we'll turn the program over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you see the screen? I mean, I assume the title and everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Looks good.
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm glad to do this, and hopefully we'll get through this here and kind of catch up on a little time here. Again, kind of what I want to talk about is some things that we've been doing here at the School of Natural Resources, and actually at the time I was with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission, and we'll just kind of jump right in here. My training as I was going through school, through my undergraduate here at the University of Nebraska and my master's and PhD, obviously I'm picking up a lot of information and being trained in and learning about the biology and ecology of waterfowl. That's where I wanted to go. That's what I wanted to do. So you're always picking up something, learning about ducks and geese and swans. And the other part of that is you're also learning a lot about their habitats. I had the privilege, as Peggy mentioned, working down south. And so I got to experience and go to a lot of different wintering habitats. But I also worked up in the North Dakota and Montana on the breeding grounds, and I've been up to the Arctic and so forth. So I've been around and looked at waterfowl habitats, and kind of what you do as a biologist, and as you're kind of getting trained up, you kind of also then kind of meld the two. You're looking at what waterfowl are doing, what they're doing, why they're doing it, and then again, how they're using those habitats, when they're using those habitats they prefer, and all that sort of thing. So again, it's this kind of melding that you get ensconced in terms of knowing everything you can about waterfowl and their habitats. And as I took the job with Nebraska Game and Parks, the one thing that I found out about is that there's another part of that in my primary job. There, the duties there were working with waterfowl hunters and primarily dealing with waterfowl hunting seasons, but also managing populations. And so that was kind of a new little twist. And it wasn't like I didn't get training through school or some experience as you went along with harvest management, but I really got kind of some OJT when I got here at Game and Parks. And kind of as you go through your career, and one of the things that we kind of, and it was through this revision of the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, and as you can see there, that's what NAWAMP refers to as the North American Waterfowl Management Plan. One of the things we were going through that revision, and what we discovered, and it was kind of, I don't want to say a big revelation, but it was, I think, in terms of us thinking about it a little bit, that waterfowl populations, waterfowl habitat, and waterfowl hunters are all interconnected. And it kind of comes in this nice little perfect, what is it, the isosceles triangle here, that, you know, when everything's going well, all sides of that triangle are at the same angle, same length. And when things kind of go askew, then we start running into problems with one of them. And that's kind of where I'm going to go tonight a little bit. But just recognize that there's this relationship between duck populations, habitat, and duck hunters. And I'll refer to duck hunters, but and probably keep it at that, but that also applies to goose hunters as well. And the one thing and how that triangle works, or how that interconnected is the fact that for anybody out there that duck hunts knows that they have to buy a federal duck stamp each year before they go waterfowl hunting. And that's been around since 1934. It's generated almost $1 billion, and it's getting pretty close to that here since 1934, and protected. And now I think it's over 6 million acres of habitat. So each and every year when waterfowl stamps are purchased, those funds go into protection of waterfowl habitat. And here in Nebraska and others, and probably I think about every other state, there are state duck stamps. And here in Nebraska, and I was around and helped get the waterfowl stamp here in Nebraska going. And that stamp, part of the funding that is generated from that waterfowl stamp actually goes to conservation in Canada. And so it's kind of a program that all states kind of participate in, or the vast majority. And that money is kind of funneled up to Canada. And as it's funneled, it goes to various through various kind of different matching programs. And so actually, if you send up a little bit of money, what you're going to do is get 4 times that amount as it's leveraged up. So you really get a bang for your buck in terms of putting habitat on the ground in Canada, where the ducks that we harvest here in Nebraska, the vast majority come from. The other thing too about waterfowl hunting and what's occurring is that you have a lot of conservation organizations that are out there that are also generating financial resources, and again putting habitat on the ground. And a lot of these again are fueled again by waterfowl hunters for the most part, and they occur at national levels, but down even to state levels. And so again, you kind of have this whole gearing of waterfowl hunting kind of helping put waterfowl habitat on the ground, which then again obviously helps waterfowl populations. And finally, again, we've already talked about the waterfowl management plan, but this plan was put into place in 1986, and this is kind of one of the it actually changed how habitat is being how it's done and how it's delivered and for all wildlife in North America. And it's kind of a game changer in terms of when this came out about how habitat was going to be put into place for waterfowl. And again, we kind of have this whole system that's out there that partners come together to put waterfowl, put financial resources into waterfowl habitat, which again benefits populations. So again, this connection between waterfowl hunting populations and habitat is there, and it's probably in a big way in terms of more than probably a lot of other species groups that you may think of. There's a lot of reasons to conserve wetlands. And here's a list, and actually this is a list I provided a class of mine here just the other day of what are the benefits of wetlands. And again, there's a lot of reasons that we should be conserving wetlands out there. Kind of unfortunately, when we look at these benefits and all that they do, is there really isn't a lot of mechanisms to kind of help fund conservation of wetlands. And so what it's going to kind of come down to, or what it has come down to, is the fact that waterfowl hunters and kind of this system that's been in place, since again 1986, I'll say, but even before that, with the duck stamp and other things, is that wetland conservation is really being funded still to this point by waterfowl hunters and kind of that whole tradition. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves, and hopefully that'll change, but that's kind of where we find ourselves at this point. And that's a little disconcerting in some ways, because if we look at the long-term populations of ducks, and then also duck stamp sales, which is the number of hunters that we have, up until a point that tracked really well. And so as duck populations went up and down, so did hunter numbers. But about 1993, after kind of the latest decrease in waterfowl populations and then kind of that rebound, what we found out is that relationship between hunters and duck populations kind of lessened, or it got weakened. And what that means is, in terms of, and we looked at this in a paper that we did. Actually, it's 10 years old now, which we're going to be starting to redo this one here a little bit and bring it up to speed. But what we found out was, from that time period, that if that relationship would have stayed the same, we would have had $126 million more in revenue, and that's just from the federal duck stamp. And you can see there that we would have had a pretty big impact in terms of money going to at least South Dakota. We just use that as an example, but we could have protected a lot of wetlands and associated uplands, either through acquisition or easements. So definitely that relationship not staying the same, i.e. meaning we didn't have the same number of duck hunters that we should have seen out there. We've lost a little bit in terms of habitat protection. And so one of the things that kind of, when you realize that, hey, hunters are going to be the individuals right now kind of leading the charge in terms of habitat conservation. We need hunters at this juncture until we get other funding mechanisms in place, is that we really need to understand kind of our waterfowl hunters. And I call it ecology and management of waterfowl hunters. And it's almost kind of comparable to the same things we need to know about duck populations and how they go up and down. We need to do the same thing with our waterfowl hunters. So when we look at that and how we do that, it's through social science, which means our human dimensions work, which can mean a lot of different things. But a couple things, there's been kind of primary focus areas that have kind of occurred, and I'll say the last 30 years, kind of getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but we've kind of looked at some of the demographics of duck hunters. We've went back and kind of started, hey, why do you even go duck hunting? What do you expect when you go out? What kind of experience do you want? What do you like? What you don't like? And just kind of their satisfaction. And kind of the satisfaction part of it is, there's an assumption that, hey, if you're satisfied, you're probably going to keep duck hunting, which means you're going to keep buying stamps, permits, and so forth. Probably one of the big things that, again, when I was with Nebraska Game and Parks, one of the things in terms of doing the social sciences with waterfowl hunters was actually getting their opinions on regulations and the various things associated with their preferences for regulations. And probably in the last 10, 15 years, there's been a lot of it, and all these, the three above it, kind of fit into this R3, where we're talking about recruiting, retaining, or reactivating waterfowl hunters. And so that's kind of been a real emphasis here, like you say, in the last 10 years or so, or a little bit longer than that. And I'm going to go through each one of these a little bit in a little bit of detail. So when we're talking about demographics, for example, what we're talking about is some really basic things. There were 3 major surveys done in the last 30 some years here. When you go back to 1995, 2005, and 2015, these were fairly big surveys in terms of the number of states involved. And in 2005 and 2015, these were actually all states were involved in these surveys. And so you get some idea of just, again, what are people doing out there when they go, and kind of you see some similarities in terms of the days hunted. We know kind of the bulk or the average of waterfowl hunters, maybe surprising to some, is that they hunt, the majority of people hunt 10 days or less during the hunting season. And when you look at the duck harvest, in terms of individuals, not quite, but you're talking 30, 40, getting close to 50% of the duck hunters are actually harvesting 10 ducks or less each year. Coupled with that, excuse me, we also looked at it, we did a kind of a different study and turned that around a little bit. And so those guys that are really good duck hunters, so to speak, the most successful, what they do is, so this would be like the top 10%, the top 10 most successful duck hunters. What they actually do is a very small percentage actually account for about 30 to 40% of the duck harvest annually. So what you have is a whole lot of individuals that don't harvest a whole lot of ducks, and then you got a small percentage that kind of have a greater proportion of what they do in terms of harvest. So again, you kind of see a little bit of discrepancy in individuals and the way, or just kind of, again, the days they hunted or the ducks they harvest. And it's probably, as you would guess, the one other thing that you can look at and what has been done, and I think it's, again, kind of intuitive that not everybody's, made of the same cloth. And so kind of, again, taking apart hunters to some extent, because we do these surveys, you kind of lump them together. There's been a couple studies kind of pulling them apart or trying to group these individuals and trying to get a little bit more classification of exactly kind of what type of hunter they may be. And so in Minnesota, there was a big survey done in that state. And what they found, actually, if you look at the list here, you see participant in the first three categories, and then enthusiast in the last two. And again, first of all, there's kind of two different categories there about just being able to participate, and then again, just kind of maybe the level of that participation. But you can kind of see when we look at this, we recognize that, okay, we got some waterfowl hunters out here that when you look at the long-term hunters, they keep going. They may not harvest a lot of ducks, but they're going to go about every year. The less engaged, as the name would imply, they don't go every year. And the recreational casual probably even goes even less than those two groups. And then you have this, again, this enthusiast that kind of their experiences want to be on a more social level. And then you have those that are a little bit more in terms of achievement orientated, meaning, i.e., they want to shoot their ducks. So again, we kind of see this different categories of hunters out there. And real recently, again, with the national survey that we did in 2015, kind of that same thing was done. And I apologize for not listing out all the characteristics, but if you start doing that, then you really get long here. But we found kind of the same thing. And actually it broke it down into 4 categories of hunters, where you had those that are devoted, that are going to go out as much as they can each year. You have some that, again, kind of the local guys that they're not going to go as much, and they want to stay pretty close to home, so they're not maybe as driven as some of the other groups. Again, as harvest orientated, as you would guess, those are the individuals that really want to shoot ducks. And then the selective group is kind of a different one. This group is one that they're actually kind of driven by harvest. They want to shoot ducks, but they really select the days or the times. They kind of want to maximize that. So they're not going to go a lot, but they want to go when they have the best chance to harvest ducks. So again, kind of some interesting results in terms of, looking at hunters and how they may be slightly different. The other thing that we recently did here at University of Nebraska was, and this is something, again, in terms of waterfowl populations and duck populations, one of the key demographics we're always trying to find is survival. We want to know the survival rate of these animals. If there's a high survival rate, that means one thing. If it's low, it's another. And we're always trying to find that. And the probably the most common and long-lasting way we can do that is through bands. A lot of people think banding is done to kind of look at where ducks are harvested at, which it does, and when, but actually banding provides that key estimation of survival is really the primary use of banding. Well, we kind of took the same techniques for banding ducks and did the same thing for hunters. And so, excuse me. So what we did is actually kind of divided the generations up, as you can see in the bottom, between baby boomers, kind of the older folks, all the way to kind of the younger folks now. And these are really using kind of basically the same techniques in terms of analysis. Went back and looked at just what do we have for a survival rate of hunters. And when I say that, what I mean is, are they actually going to purchase a license the next year or in future years? So are they kind of going duck hunting a little bit and going every year, or are they going every few years? But, what's their status, quote, in the population, or are they dropping out entirely? And one of the interesting things we found about this is that, again, we get a survival, which means, generally speaking, those individuals are about 75 to 85%, again, purchasing license within, and I think we were looking at a 10-year period there. But what we found in this was that if they belong to a conservation organization like Ducks Unlimited, that raised that survival estimate maybe like 5 points, which, again, for a wildlife population, raising your survival rate up maybe 5 or more points really tells you something in terms of that population, or, again, something you want to see in a population is the increase in survival. We looked at motivations, and again, this was here at the School of Natural Resources, and we're, kind of some basic things. And there's been a lot of motivation work done through hunting and a lot of different, if you again, you see here, big game fishing, all that, it's kind of been done separately. And we actually kind of, I think, one of the first times kind of looked at this through a bunch of different groups. And as you would expect, I think on some of this, you would not expect that food would be a major motivation for waterfowl hunters, or maybe even small and upland game bird hunters. I was a little surprised, to be honest with you, when we got these back, that I thought fishing might be a little bit higher in terms of a food motivation, but definitely big game. So your deer hunters, when their motivation to go big game hunting is centered around food and kind of that challenge. You do see across all 4 of these that nature, getting out in the nature, that experience of getting outdoors is important to all of them, and highest for both waterfowl and big game. The key one here for waterfowl, if you look at the bottom, is that social component. Their motivation is to, again, be hunting with friends and family, and that social aspect that you find with waterfowl hunting. And I've always contended that waterfowl hunting is by far the most social kind of type of hunting people can do. You're sitting in a blind, you're in the same place, you can talk without necessarily scaring something off. So there is a real social component to waterfowl hunting, and that comes through in their motivations for why they're even going waterfowl hunting. One of the things too that has recently more or less came up, that was a little bit of a surprise in some ways, is that, and we're looking at hunter satisfaction, and again, thinking satisfaction is going to lead to more or more consistent purchasing of stamps and permits. But a lot of the satisfaction in a couple different studies was showing that is tempered or determined by the hunter's expectations. So as you can see here, like in bag limits, for example, if you're going out hunting, and you think for whatever reason, and the bag limit is at, say, and it is currently at 6 ducks, bag limits at 6, well, your expectation is probably to harvest 6 ducks. And that may be based on waterfowl populations, talking with other friends and family, whoever it may be, but there's this expectation that you have. And when you don't meet that expectation, then you're dissatisfied, or more likely to be dissatisfied. And so this has, again, this is somewhat recent, and this is really kind of actually caused a lot of discussion, because it comes back to, as managers, what do you set for a bag limit? And the other thing we know, and again, if you kind of went back and remember how many people are harvesting and what kind of ducks, there's not a whole lot of people that are actually harvesting their daily bag limit on a consistent basis. So what do you set the bag limit at? You're probably going to have more people achieve a bag limit at 4 or 5 than you are 6. And so again, it kind of causes this discussion about regulations, about where you're going to sit those, or set those bag limits. But what we also found in a couple studies, and one that we also did here at School of Natural Resources, was that, hey, hunters can help themselves in terms of setting their expectations. If hunters do some scouting, they're mobile, they spend a few more days of field, all those things can help them increase their satisfaction. And that's because when you go scouting, or you're able to move around, you put more time in, which kind of is the way I look at that is kind of some advanced scouting, or you're out there, you kind of know what's going on. What you do is you temper your expectations. And so if you have better expectations, or probably, for lack of a better term, more accurate expectations of how you're going to do that next time out in terms of hunting, then you kind of increase your satisfaction. And I know, again, when I worked at Nebraska Game and Parks, it was funny when we kind of got these results, is because this is what I was telling hunters all the time. You have to get out, you got to go look, you got to be able to move around. The more you get around, or the more time you're out there, you'll see birds, blah, blah, blah. And it was just amazing. Sometimes people they hunker down in their blind, and that's where they're going to be, and they don't move around or do anything else. And so that's fine. And I even do a little bit of that myself. But I think then you need to make sure that you temper your expectations with that, is that, there's going to be days I'm just going to be sitting in this blind. There's nothing going to be happening. So what does satisfy a duck hunter? And I've had people tell me there's nothing that actually satisfies a duck hunter, but actually there is. And as we kind of already talked, the stage is kind of set with expectations a little bit. And this one's probably not a shocker if you had to guess in a trivia game, what would be the number one thing that satisfies a duck hunter? Well, yeah, harvesting ducks. Okay. And when we look at a number of different studies out there, that is kind of the number one thing that kind of comes consistently out. And it's kind of funny because duck hunters will tell you one thing, and then kind of, if you look a little bit deeper, it's actually, they're really telling you something else. So what we did, and it's kind of a way of analyzing this data, but we asked some Nebraska hunters about their satisfaction with waterfowl hunting. And we had these list of attributes that we thought would lend itself in terms of, yeah, this will increase your satisfaction, this won't. And so what hunters told us, so this is their response, what waterfowl hunters told us is that the number one thing they want is to be able to see game. The other thing they don't want is they don't want an interference from other hunters. They want ducks coming in their decoys, and then kind of really closely related is opportunities to shoot game. And if you noticed in here on the third one down is harvesting right there, when you ask hunters point blank, well, is harvesting going to be something to lead to your satisfaction? It's number 10 on the list. It's down at the bottom. That's what they say. Okay. So that's when they're filling out the survey. This is to tell you. And so basically they're saying, nah, I don't need to harvest any ducks. Okay. So when we take this data and kind of flip it around and match it up, what they expected to do and kind of their satisfaction, what they ended up telling us how satisfied they were, it changes a little bit. So seeing game is still important, and that opportunity to harvest birds is important. But when you look at harvesting, all of a sudden, again, what duck hunters are telling you is they don't need to harvest ducks. But what they really mean and what they really want for satisfaction is they want to harvest ducks. And then again, in terms of that's kind of, again, amplified a little bit by just harvesting a bag on it. So again, they'll tell you to their face, I don't need to shoot a duck. But really for them to be satisfied, yeah, they need to shoot a duck. So that's one way of looking at it. We did something else here too, and this is with the national survey, the data we got. So this is duck hunters across the US. So this is all 4 flyways, all states. And what we did is we kind of pulled out hunters that indicated on the survey that they were dissatisfied and those that were satisfied. And what we did is had all these different categories of attributes, and what separated satisfied from dissatisfied hunters. And the very first characteristic that separates satisfied and dissatisfied hunters is them harvesting ducks. If they harvested ducks, they were going to be satisfied. If they didn't harvest ducks, then basically they could kind of still end up down here a little bit in terms of being less dissatisfied. But if things went really bad, then they can end up being really dissatisfied. But the bottom line is the first separation between satisfied and dissatisfied hunters was actually harvesting ducks. But as you may have noted, the right behind that actually is not only harvesting ducks, is seeing ducks. And so again, when you look at some survey results, we see the same thing. And going back right to this thing we did here in Nebraska hunters, again, seeing game. So they want to see ducks out there when they go to the blind. They're wanting to see ducks, or geese for that matter, whatever it may be. That's an important attribute for satisfaction. And then we actually just completed a survey here for Saskatchewan waterfowl hunters. And again, when we looked at that information, we kind of asked them, how important it was in terms of them, in terms of their waterfowl hunting experience in Saskatchewan. And the number one was seeing waterfowl. And so when you look at the numbers here, half the people that said, how important was it? It's extremely important to half the hunters, and then another 35% are saying it's very important. So 80% of the waterfowl hunters in Saskatchewan are telling us that for them to have a satisfying hunt or a satisfying hunting trip, they want to see lots of waterfowl. And if anybody's been out up to Saskatchewan waterfowl hunting, if you don't see a lot of birds up there, you're doing something wrong. So you need to get someplace or go someplace, because when you go up there, seeing waterfowl you usually don't lack in that. So, but nonetheless, that's a key component, is seeing waterfowl. The other thing we've done here recently, over the last 5 years, we've surveyed waterfowl hunters in the Central Flyway. And this was kind of an interesting tape, because most of the surveys that are done, or that have been done like 1 year and then it's done. So you catch a snapshot of a particular year, how satisfied, or, the various characteristics of that year. So we did it over a 5-year period, and we're kind of coming up with some interesting results. We're still looking at this data, still analyzing it. but I kind of, and your eyes will probably go to the last set of bar graphs there. When you look at very satisfied, and what we've seen in the Central Flyway is this kind of decreasing amount of very satisfied individuals. And you can kind of see it starting to pick up maybe with somewhat dissatisfied individuals. So one thing that we are seeing now is this satisfaction may be variable to the year, which you would expect. But again, when you kind of look at maybe 2018, where you had, close to 30% of the hunters telling you they were very satisfied, which is actually a pretty good percentage. And then all of a sudden, in 2022, you're looking at, not even getting close to 20%. You've had maybe a pretty good drop in satisfaction levels. And again, if you think, and if you can remember here in Nebraska in 2022, that was, and in fact, it was one of my poorest hunting seasons, very dry, not a lot of water, warm temperatures. The ducks didn't migrate really well. And that kind of happened in a couple states. Your satisfaction is going to go down. So again, kind of some interesting stuff for a long-term survey that what we're doing. And now again, talking about preferences, what we've kind of done some survey work too about what hunters want. And again, nothing, this isn't going to win a Nobel Peace Prize for a scientific finding, but what hunters do want is they want a place close to home. And actually what you're seeing is that hunters, they kind of want to be someplace about an hour within their residence to go waterfowl hunting if they can. And as that distance increases, the satisfaction or those preferences really go down in terms of how far they want to travel. And again, nothing surprising here that when they go there, they don't want to see anybody else or have very little competition. So this actually does have some ramifications if you stop and think about Nebraska and where the population centers are here in Nebraska. They're way in the east. And if you stop and think how much access or places for people in Omaha or Lincoln have to go within an hour's drive, there may not be as many as if you think of somebody around Grand Island, Kearney, or someplace a little bit further west where they can be within an hour of their house. So it does have implications in terms of access problems, or if the Game and Parks or some other agency wants to acquire property, maybe we need to be buying that property or acquiring that property a little bit closer to Lincoln, Omaha, or other population centers. In a little bit different survey, and that's why it's a different color footnote there, is that we did another study, and one thing that was kind of surprising across the board for a lot of different waterfowl hunters in terms of their participation was that they actually wanted some areas that would allow for a quality hunt, meaning again, those two things, and probably more than anything, a little competition, but areas that also had a lot of ducks on those areas. So again, not a lot of people can get in there, but when you get in there, you can have a real quality hunt. And so again, those things are a little bit hard to kind of manage and dictate by agencies, but hunters, again, want that opportunity to have a real quality hunt. All right, in terms of regulations, across all those three major surveys we've done, the one thing that's kind of been determined is that if you go below a 3 duck bag limit, participation by duck hunters really starts dropping, or they indicate to us that they're just not going to go out for anything less than 3 ducks per day. And so again, all three surveys have kind of seen that. We asked that, I think, in the Canada survey as well, kind of the same response. So there is kind of a bottom line where that there seems to be a threshold that, okay, we're really not going to go out when it's below that. But in the last two surveys, what we found out, the big two national surveys, was that actually duck hunters are pretty happy with the 6 bird bag limit right now. So again, I think we're kind of in a place now where our bag limits are probably pretty good. But again, going back and thinking about expectations, if we dropped it a bird or two, would we kind of make things happy without kind of crossing that lower threshold? By far, what we found out in the last couple surveys, and again, from discussions with duck hunters in 20 years, without a doubt, duck hunters want long seasons. They want the opportunity to go when they have the opportunity to go. And in a short season, you just don't get as many opportunities to get out there. So they want as long a seasons as possible. And that's, again, pretty clear from all the survey responses that we've seen to this point. In the last survey, big survey, that what we found was that duck hunters, even though they like harvesting ducks, they like long seasons and so forth. One of the things they told managers is they still, and again, it kind of, if you stop and think, this goes back to seeing ducks. They want to take care of duck populations, and they want large duck populations out there. So it's kind of a two-pronged thing here with this one. Again, they want to see ducks, but I think it's also that concern that duck populations are doing well, and it's kind of that conservation mindedness behind, even though they're harvesting ducks, they want good duck populations out there. And the final one in that last, what we kind of found out in some other surveys is that pretty much people want to, and it kind of relates to bag limits again, but a little bit more specific, keeping that hen mallard bag limit about 1, even though it currently is 2. There's some preference for people kind of wanting to keep that thing or even reducing it. And the final thing about regulations, through a couple different surveys in a couple different areas, and this makes total sense, and they should, but hunters want to be able to provide input into waterfowl hunting regulations, or they want a voice. And again, they should. And so it kind of reaffirms that they should have that. And actually, in some places, they may not have that opportunity. And I know one state, and I won't mention where, but there's a reluctance to use kind of hunter input to set regulations, or even ask hunters about regulatory alternatives. And again, I think that's incorrect. I think you need to provide hunters with some form or fashion to be able to provide input into regulatory actions or management actions. The other thing too, getting into simple and complex regulations, and I won't go into what complex regulations are, but in Nebraska, there's a lot of different things that people have to negotiate and to be able to go duck hunting. And if you're a new duck hunter, and don't know those regulations very well, that really doesn't charge you up to go out there. And so, as much as we can make those regulations complex, and there's a certain group of hunters that want to really stretch out regulations to get every duck they can and every opportunity they can. Every time you do that, it kind of discourages participation by somebody new. And the flip side of that is, if you make regulations really simple, then what you're going to do is lose some hunting opportunity. So, for example, if we had a simple 40-day season with a 3 duck bag limit and any 3 ducks, we know right now that, like mallards and other species, can actually take a lot more harvest pressure. You're going to lose hunting opportunity. So you kind of have these divergent objectives out there, in that you want these simpler regulations to give people a chance to go waterfowl hunting, but also you want to give these regulations enough that people want to, or desire those complex regulations to be able to, again, participate more or harvest more birds. And so probably some of you out there, I hope there's some waterfowl hunters out there, but if you have, then in the last 2 years, what we've done in Nebraska and South Dakota, we've kind of come up with this new regulations in terms of making tiers of hunters. So before waterfowl hunters go out, they have to register through HIP, And what this does is hunters have to choose between one of either tier 1 or tier 2, which again, they can choose to say, hey, you know what, I want 6 ducks a day. I want the opportunity to harvest that. And I'm willing to put up with all the different species and sex regulations out there. And then you have the other one where people say, you know what, I really just want to shoot 3 ducks a day. I don't want to have to worry about what 3 ducks I'm shooting. I just want to take 3 ducks and I'm good to go with it. We're in this, I think this is coming this fall will be the 3rd year of this experiment. And we're looking forward to seeing what kind of comes out of this, but it's kind of a different way again of looking at regulations to both kind of meet those divergent objectives of providing a lot of hunting opportunity, but encouraging participation. The other thing in terms of motives and participation in R3, we did a big study again, looking at both waterfowl hunters that the one group that frequently, maybe they hunt every year, those that hunt maybe every other year, and those that have hunted maybe 5 years ago, they did waterfowl hunt, they quit. And then we also looked at people that had never waterfowl hunted before, so deer hunters up on game bird hunters. And then we actually even surveyed anglers. And as you would guess, and it always comes up in terms of barriers to participation or R3, access is a key one that comes up in terms of being able to participate more or encouraging participation. But if you kind of look at these numbers, and again, the higher the number, the more important it is to kind of have that attribute or agencies to provide that or change that. So if we look at rules and regulations at the very top, if you kind of do some things in terms of simplifying regulations, it doesn't really going to impact the waterfowl hunters, but it does have a kind of a bigger impact on non-waterfowl hunters. And again, when we look at the tier 2, that's waterfowl identification and that ability. And again, not a big deal so much for waterfowl hunters, but if you're a non-waterfowl hunter, have never been, then you kind of almost in some ways, jump up another 0.5% or so forth in terms of that being a constraint for you to going out waterfowl hunting. So you can look at all those and again, they kind of change between each of the groups. The bottom line to this though, even though access was one of the top ones, it's not like it's overwhelming. And so there's a lot of different barriers for each individual, depending who you are, that may prohibit you or be a constraint for you to go waterfowl hunting. So there's a lot of things that agencies can do, and things that we need to do, again, to encourage participation. But there isn't a silver bullet in here that's real easy. I'm going to wrap up here pretty quick, and then I'll go to the questions. I see there's a number in the chat here, or maybe there's comments. And really, a lot of the stuff that we've done here about waterfowl ecology, if you will, knowing about waterfowl hunter, has really occurred just in the last 30 years. That one big survey kind of kicked it off. There was some stuff before that, but we've really kind of learned a lot about hunter preferences, opinions, satisfaction, motives, all the stuff that I've kind of presented. And I've really kind of touched maybe just the highlights. There's a lot more information out there. And so we're starting to really learn a lot more about waterfowl hunters. But we still need more. And one, as an example, and I think I probably mentioned it, we assume that, again, as hunters are more satisfied, that's going to lead to more participation. And we don't really know the amount or the extent of that relationship. And so, again, we're still needing some information, and this would be a key one. We've collected we've probably collected a lot more information on duck hunters and goose hunters. And we found a little bit of differences in there and some stuff that we have done. So duck hunters, all their satisfaction and so forth may not equal to what goose hunters want. The bottom line to all this is that kind of however we look at waterfowl hunters, the one thing that comes clear with some of the stuff that we are seeing, and to kind of keep the tradition going here is that we still need abundant waterfowl populations. And again, thinking back to that triangle, to have abundant waterfowl populations, we need to have habitat, which means basically wetland conservation. If we don't have this, in terms of a lot of the stuff, in terms of we've been looking at here, this information, and we've done it, all this information the last 30 years have been pretty good duck and goose populations. A lot of things will start changing. But we know for us, in terms of the waterfowl hunting tradition, if this isn't met, if we don't have a lot of ducks out there and we're not saving a lot of habitat, we're going to be in a bad way. And this kind of comes home too, I don't know how many people out there know it, but again, the state of Nebraska, I think, just joined a lawsuit against the waters of the US or wetlands protection. And it's things like that when you see and hear, as a state, our attorney general kind of battling against wetland conservation, it really kind of, it hits home to me. And it really kind of, also, I'll just say irritated, but recognizing that if that doesn't happen, wetland conservation doesn't happen, there's going to be ramifications down the road. So if there's any questions, I'll take them now. And again, thanks for all your time. So Peggy, I don't know if you want to open it up to chat or stop sharing.
Yeah, I can go ahead and people can keep entering questions if they have them. But one question is, did you say $1 billion since it started? And I think that refers to the income from the waterfowl stamps.
Yeah, it's getting close to that. It's creeping up. It's been 900 million since 1934. So
900 million, yeah, that's a lot.
yes, yes, it is.
And there was a question about, will we be able to share this after? I know we have recorded it and it will be on the Conservation Nebraska YouTube channel, probably in a couple weeks. I don't know if you want to share your PowerPoint, Mark, or not, but I know it's been recorded and it will be on our YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, I can provide it in PDF, Peggy, and send you in an email if you want it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is kind of a long question. Do you think the influence of social media has possibly changed waterfowl hunting in the sense of outfitters and big time? Just a minute here. Waterfowl hunting, posting pile pictures and numbers constantly compared.
Yeah, I mean, social media has it, and that would be another great, in terms of, again, when we start thinking about other questions and other stuff that we need. Social, in my opinion, I don't have any data on it, but social media has really changed duck hunting, I think, or waterfowl hunting, as well as a lot of other types of hunting. With waterfowl hunting, the other thing I look at with that, it probably does allow guides and so forth to kind of get their message out and see that. What it also does, what I've seen, and we've talked about this in the flyway with other biologists, is that it seems like there's not a place a duck can sit down for very long, or a bunch of ducks sit down for very long, that somebody's not after them. And if there's a concentration, people post their pictures, and something I never ever do is tell people where I've shot my ducks, but people seem to do that. They go, "Oh man, we were down in Arkansas at this place and we hammered the ducks." And again, they show the dead ducks, and then before you know it, the place just gets inundated with people. And so, yeah, social media has really changed, I think, waterfowl hunting in a big way.
Interesting. There's a comment that Mark can probably make a whole new Zoom on what social media has done to hunting, good and bad.
Yeah. It's tough because we haven't really, we haven't measured it beforehand, or people haven't looked at that, and it's kind of tough, but how you would want to look at it, but it has, there's no doubt in my mind.
Yeah, it's changed a lot of things, probably.
Yeah, it has. It's changed. Yeah, it has.
Um, yeah, and Mitch was saying, thank you, a lot of great information. I was wondering, do you think all the talk about gun control and so forth has made people hesitant to hunt or made hunting not so popular? Because you're saying that you're losing hunters. Is that correct? We don't have as many as we used to.
Yeah, we've kind of lost that relationship with populations and so forth. So yeah, we're losing waterfowl hunters, that's for
Yeah.
sure. And there's another one too that makes it I don't know, to be honest with you. I think people understand, and I'll use my wife as an example, because I kind of see her as kind of maybe the lay person here in this. You know, she definitely, and she's waterfowl hunted, but she can see the difference between people using a firearm for hunting and then kind of these assault weapons or
Yeah.
those automatic weapons or semi-automatic, excuse me. And I think she can see the difference potentially in their use, and maybe it comes back to, again, the rhetoric that she's been hearing a little bit too. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know if it's had impact or not. That's a good question. I don't think that's been a part of it.
Okay.
But it probably does kind of maybe cast a little bit more negative feelings about firearms and so forth. But
Yeah.
I think if anybody that wants to think about it calmly will recognize there is a difference. But
Yeah.
some people don't want to see that difference either. So
Yeah. Okay, we have maybe you have this too. Paul would like to connect with you, and he left his email there if you want to.
okay.
And if you would send me your PowerPoint and we can send it out to people. Is that what you were saying?
I can get a PDF. So
Oh, okay, yeah. And then the other thing would be, it will be up on the Conservation Nebraska YouTube channel. So
okay,
very interesting presentation and beautiful pictures. We
thank
really
you.
appreciate you taking the time to do it.
Yeah. I'm trying to get his address here real quick.
Okay.
And I see there's another one on 2-tier. I'd like to we're in the second year of that, and that's been we've had some pretty good buy-in from that. The people that have done it really enjoy it. Surprisingly, with the buy-in on that, the group of people we did not anticipate at all. We have actually a fair contingent of people, and I'm getting there, older individuals that have
Yeah.
a difficult time seeing now. And
Uh-huh.
now, and they don't want to bring 6 ducks home. They want to get out to the blind. They know they can't ID their birds, and they've actually have come back into hunting because of tier 2. So we use it. We thought it was a recruitment tool for young kids. We've actually got people that are 60, 70 years old coming back into duck hunting because of tier 2. So
Interesting. Yeah, that is interesting. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions. I would like to thank you again, and I want to apologize for the technical difficulties here. I'm new to Zoom. I don't think I ever did it before COVID. So a lot of us are that way, I'm sure. We appreciate everybody attending. And for more information about Conservation Nebraska, you can go to our website at neconserve.org or just look up Conservation Nebraska. Got one more chat. Okay, thank you for the informative presentation, Mark, and for all you have done for waterfowl and waterfowl hunters in Nebraska. The picture of Joe Farrer and Nick Lyman with a brace of mallards is a classic. Both are waterfowling legends in Nebraska. Yeah, that's cool.
wow. So somebody knows those guys. So
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good day in the blind. So when you talk about social aspects, that was a good day in the blind from that standpoint. So
Yeah. Okay, let me make sure I don't have, okay. I think we got all the questions. Well, that one doesn't seem to want it. Am I missing one? No, okay. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good rest of your evening. Thank you, Mark. I apologize for
no problem. No
mix-up.
problem.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.